Hey everybody, it's Joe from Greenlight Sound and greenlightsound.com here with a video about the new Waves plugin, the CLA MixHub, which is a model of Chris Lord Alge's SSL 4000 series mixing desk, along with some other sort of workflow enhancements that have changed the way we work in the digital domain at least, and tried to mimic what's going on when working on a large format analog console. So the very first thing I'd like to get to with this is just the sound. Before we get into the workflow pros and cons of this plugin, I'm going to just use it on one track in this expanded view here, where everything is now on one part of the plugin page rather than bucket view, where all the various channels are lined up here. So the very first one we're going to look at is going to be just a program beat, a drum beat here. Here's what it sounds like, no processing yet. So what I'm going to do is just go through sort of the modules here, the input module, the EQ dynamic section, and the output module, and just start to tweak a little bit and see if I can come up with a nice sound. So the first thing I'm going to do is use this part here to first add some noise. The analog mode is in, so it's going to be modeling some of this drive of the console. I'll mess with this input drive to try to build some saturation into it. Then I'll filter some things out, go through EQ and compression. Plugin bypass now. That's where we started, and engaged again. So just some EQ, some parallel compression, kind of slamming it into the 1176 blue stripe style compressor there. Some drive going in to fatten up the signal, some filtering, and then pulling down the output a bit. So if it's going to be used in this mode, you can really create some really cool sounds, and it's a great alternative. And it's sort of inexpensive, at least as a starting price. It's $69, alternative to some of the other SSL style plugins you can get. And I don't use the original Waves SSLE series plugin. I use the Brainworks one instead, but I don't know if this is an improvement upon that one. I've heard that it is, but I can't claim that for myself, so I'm not sure. So some of the pros of this. First of all, it's nice to have 1176 blue stripe alternative here, in addition to just the console SSL VCA style compression. That's a nice alternative, especially when you're working with vocals or percussion elements and you like that 1176 style of compression. The insert module here, if you got a bunch of Waves plugins, I have a medium amount, I don't have a lot of Waves plugins, but you can insert another plugin in here, which is great to fit into the SSL style workflow, but still have other flavors of compression, EQ, effects if you want to use them. And the overall idea of this bucket view, which if you're not familiar with, it's about working with 8 tracks all at once. Sort of like you're on an analog console, where you can just reach and grab EQ here and there, compression here and there, and have everything laid out in front of you at the same time rather than one plugin window at a time. It's a really a cool idea. Not a totally original idea. Some other DAWs actually have this built in, but a pretty cool idea. You have the input sections here, the EQ, 8 channels at once, dynamics 8 channels at once, output 8 channels at once, and you can have up to 8 buckets giving you 64 total channels to control through this plugin. So there's some cons to this plugin. First of all, in Studio One at least, when you apply this to the tracks, it's supposed to get the name of the track from your console down here, from your channel within the DAW, and apply that to the actual plugin itself. Sometimes it works, like here, acoustic guitar sub, that worked. I'll move over to another one here. Sometimes it doesn't. None 145 just gives you none and a number next to it. So then I have to manually type in, this is the Telecaster track, so type in Tele and there. So it's an extra step there. For some reason, Studio One does not always work correctly. Maybe it's a bug for everybody. Maybe it's just Studio One related. Not sure. Once you do get all these tracks named, you have to go into this bucket view and you have to assign and name these buckets first of all and assign the tracks you want to them. So that's kind of another workflow step. The buckets are not large enough. That's my biggest gripe with the plugin. When working with modern productions, you typically are not going to have only 8 of one instrument type, especially when you're talking about background vocals or drum parts. If you have a lot of room mics and individual kit pieces mic'd. So I ended up in this mix, which is not even a huge drum mix, having to make 2 buckets for drums. First one covering the first 8 tracks, and the next one covering the next 6 tracks, which kind of defeats the purpose of being able to tweak everything at once within a family of instruments. What you can do here is kind of group close mics in one, room mics in another, and that kind of works. Guitars, especially, I don't have a lot of guitars in this track, only 5, but if you can have 25 guitar parts. I mean, you can get sessions that are in the hundreds in terms of track count, and that kind of defeats the purpose of this plugin. I like the idea of it. The idea of having all of these things, EQ, dynamics, input, all available in one window through a bunch of channels, but it not quite enough to fit for a lot of sessions. One of the other gripes I have, if you're in bucket view, here, which we are right here, and you're in the input, or output rather, there's no pan available. You have to go into channel view. Mono tracks have no pan at all, which is kind of annoying. Stereo tracks, if I can find... There we go. Stereo tracks do have a pan knob here, but mono ones don't. So you kind of, the point of this plugin is to keep yourself in one window here, not have to jump around between your DAW and the plugin window. You kind of have to anyway for panning. So it's kind of annoying it breaks up the workflow convenience of having to jump back and forth. Same thing for sends. If you have effects you want to use and you don't want to use it in here, in an insert slot within the plugin, but want to use it as a bus or an aux and send it to it, you kind of have to jump back and forth anyway. So it defeats the purpose of the plugin in that sense. There's no solo or mute buttons in here either, which is kind of strange. If you're trying to model a channel strip, but you still have to jump down into your own DAW to solo and mute tracks, it would be nice to have it done right within the plugin window. One more step of not having to jump outside the plugin. There's kind of small controls when you're in bucket mode, and that's kind of the case with most Waves plugins, is that the controls are kind of small and the interface is not resizable. It could have been easily fixed if you could simply resize the interface, even if you only had a couple of size options rather than completely resizable, maybe a small, medium, large mode, that would work. But it doesn't work that way for Waves plugins, so it's kind of small. The other gripe about this plugin, for a plugin that's meant to be used across a bunch of channels in a mix, it's pretty CPU intensive. In fact, if I move over to a different mix I have going here, where I actually tweaked a few controls within the mix, tried to mix with the bucket mode, if I'm looking at my performance monitor, each instance of the CLA MixHub for me is between 3 and 5% CPU hit. Now, if you've got a really high track count, it's quickly going to become unmanageable. Look at this one. I have a lot going on compression-wise on the kick here, 11%. It's just crazy. That's a lot. If I'm pushing 40% on it, this is a relatively small mix, not a lot of tracks. I haven't even engaged any of my other processing in terms of reverbs and delays that are built into my template or other mix bus processing. It's, in my opinion, unless you have a monster computer, too CPU heavy to really be used across all tracks, especially when you compare it to other SSL style plugins like the Brainworks BX Console SSL license plugin. which has barely any CPU hit and can be used across many tracks. This doesn't really work that way yet. And Waves plugins in general tend to be CPU intensive, but when you have a style of plugin that's meant to be used across a bunch of tracks, it doesn't really work in this case. Another thing, when you're in bucket mode here, on a normal SSL console, you'd have a button that would allow you to switch between the order of EQ and dynamics. Quick little button hit, boom, compressor comes first, then the EQ, or the EQ comes first, then the compressor. In this case, you can't switch in bucket mode at all. You'd have to switch back to the full channel view and then slide the module over, which would then reset it. And you want to change it there, you got to move it back again, which takes a little second delay for it to happen. In the actual SSL, you just pop that button in and it reverses the order of compression or dynamics. So that's a little bit of a negative on this one. So again, it's a novel idea. The whole idea of having these buckets and working analog console style, I like a lot, but there's just a few missing elements or some limitations that don't make it quite as easy of an adjustment or as much of a replication of working on an analog console as you would like. So for now, I'm demoing this one. I doubt I'm going to purchase it. I'd kind of like my other SSL emulation from Brainworks a little bit better than this one. So maybe it gets tweaked in the future, some updates, it would work great, but for now it doesn't quite work for me. So there it is, the pros and cons of the new CLA MixHub plugin from Waves. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Let me know if you have any questions or comments below, and thanks for watching.